Hi, everybody. This is Mike Dowdy here, and I'm excited to share this great conversation with you that I had recently with the New York State School Boards Association on their President's Gavel podcast. So this episode is based on a popular session from this year's Leadership and Education event that the School Boards Association does every year. And this particular content was about media literacy based on a presentation that I gave with one of my colleagues. So join us as we delve into the challenges of the modern information ecosystem and explore how educators can empower students to become savvy thinkers rather than merely endless scrollers. So the host of the podcast is Laszewski, and she's the Leadership Development Manager at the New York State School Boards Association. I'm in the conversation, and then my colleague, Kate Hamill, who has a role similar to mine in a different part of New York State.
The following program is presented to you by the New York State School Boards Association.
Media literacy. What does it mean? And why is it such a crucial topic in education right now, especially for students growing up in 2025? And why is it more important than ever to help kids think critically about what they see and hear? Today, we ask these questions and discuss how we can empower students to thrive in today's media landscape. Stay with us.
Let's call this meeting to order.
Hello and welcome to NYSSBA's President's Gavel podcast, a podcast for all school board members. I'm your host, Laszewski, Leadership Development Manager at the New York State School Boards Association. Last month, NYSSBA members from across the state joined us in Albany for our annual Leadership and Education event. This month on the President's Gavel, we're revisiting a popular session from that event, Critical Thinking Through Media Literacy. Joining me to explore this topic is Dr. Michael J. Dowdy, Assistant Superintendent for the Northeastern Regional Information Center at Capital Region BOCES. Mike also joined us back in 2023 for episode 39, What's So Scary About AI? And I'm glad to welcome him back to the show today. Mike, welcome back.
Thanks so much, Ann. Great to be here.
Also joining the discussion today is Katherine Hamill, Director for the Mid-Hudson Regional Information Center. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very happy to be here this morning.
Awesome. So many of us have experienced that moment when speaking with a friend or family member about a random topic and they say something to the effect, well, I saw it on the internet, so it must be true, right? That kind of unquestioning trust in what we see online is becoming a growing challenge in society today. And it's exactly why media literacy is such a crucial topic in education right now. But what does media literacy really mean, especially for students growing up in our world today? With news, videos, and information coming at kids from every direction, why is it more important than ever to help them think critically about what they see and hear? We know most students have devices and internet access now, but what are the next steps? How do we help them use those tools to be savvy thinkers instead of just endless scrollers? And what about deepfakes, these AI-generated videos, even fake audio that sounds totally real? What skills do students and adults, for that matter, need to stop these fakes and stop misinformation before it spread? If you've ever wondered how teachers can take these big ideas about digital fluency and media literacy and turn them into lessons students can actually apply in life, or how we can empower students to thrive in this wild media landscape, you're in the right place. So let's dive in. Mike, we're in the year 2025. The news landscape has never been noisier. Why do you think media literacy feels so urgent right now compared to let's say, 10 years ago?
Great question, Ann. So I just started my 30th year in K-12 education. And when I think back on how things have changed from the fall of 1996, when I started teaching, we've had the introduction of the internet, social media, mobile. Now we have AI. So it's become the perfect storm. People have ready access to information at a rate and an amount that we never have before. And people are going increasingly into their echo chambers because they're being served up information and quote unquote news that matches their viewpoint or is served up to them to enrage them, to keep them engaged in the platforms that they're part of. I know we're going to get to AI later in talking about what that does, but I think generally it's about people being, and particularly students, being able to discern what's real and what isn't. And I think it's really important for us to keep in mind that there is an equity issue here, because if we are not teaching students how to do this, who is?
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, Kate, we talk a lot about the digital divide, but once kids have devices and internet, the real challenge is, what are they doing with it? How do we make sure that access actually leads to critical thinking and not just more scrolling?
Again, great question. And really kind of to piggyback of Mike's question just now, I think when we think in terms of the digital divide, it's impossible not to also frame it within that lens of equity. So often the digital divide question is focused just on that, access to the devices and the internet. We know that school districts and communities across the state have done a lot of work to get devices and broadband access to students and families across the state. Still a need, no doubt, but one that a lot of effort has been put forth, and kudos to that. However, that's not, the end of the story there. Just making an assumption that students with the device, with the Chromebook, with the phone in their hand, actually know how to navigate the information that they access on those devices, that's the real question. And when we are not preparing students to be able to think critically and discern that information that they are using the devices to access, then we are not putting them in a position that they will be able to excel in social, academic, and other pursuits. So it truly is critical that we begin teaching students at a young age how not just to access the information, but how do they evaluate it? How do they ask the questions? And how do they engage in those conversations so that they are safely and ethically evaluating and consuming information?
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, Mike, deep fakes, AI generated videos, even fake audio, they all look and sound real. What's your take on the key skills students need to spot this stuff before it spreads?
Yeah, the good old days of being able to spot a phishing email because it came to you in broken English from a Nigerian prince are over, right? So we know that, education, I'm going to start with cyber first, because I think that's that leads us into the bigger question. Education is a very high value target for cyber criminals. Being able to get your hand or their hands on unadulterated young person information, people who don't, kids don't have credit scores yet. They don't, they're not necessarily checking what's going on with their own, information out there on the internet. So that's a problem. And being able to spot those phishing attacks and things like that is one piece of it. But then if we kind of extrapolate that into the ease with which bad actors, whether they're cyber criminals or bullies, are able to generate fake information, is making it, like you said, harder and harder to spot. It used to be easy. You could look at an AI generated image of a human being, and the AI couldn't do the fingers. They're all gnarled up and gross. It's getting better. Same with voice. You only need a couple seconds of somebody's voice in order to be able to generate it. One of the cool things about working at a RIC is that we have really close relationships with our law enforcement partners, and they're telling us that it is getting harder and harder. Law enforcement does have tools that they can use to determine if images and videos are fake, but the general public and in most institutions don't have that access. So it goes back to education. It goes back to almost developing this muscle of when I see something and I wonder if it's real, what are kind of the questions I go through in my mind? What's the source? Where did it come from? Who shared it with me? Things like that, and really trying to get everybody, not just students, but everybody in our system to think critically about what they're consuming, because we can put all of the firewalls and filters and manage detection and response systems in place. But if that carbon layer isn't trained up and paying attention, it doesn't matter what tools we have in if somebody gives up their credentials. So I think it is all about education. It is a muscle that we practice with and develop. And I'm sure Kate can add on to that from her perspective as a former librarian.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you can't iterate enough that it is, it's like a charge here, right? Like we're living in a world, it's thrown around the terms of fake news, this and that. It's important to remember media literacy and critical thinking, like this is not a political issue. And part of teaching students this is that it is okay to have your own thoughts and your perspective, and to invite them to be open to hearing other perspectives without making an assumption that something is automatically false or wrong because it doesn't align with your way of thinking. And I think now in the world we live in, both in schools and in our country, it is just so important that we have these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kate. So this one's for Kate. The state has standards around digital fluency and media literacy, but how do we go from that big picture idea to actually weaving it into a Tuesday morning lesson in a real classroom?
So, the exciting opportunity here when it comes to thinking about media literacy, digital fluency, is that while often, as Mike referred, it is the great work that school librarians are doing in New York State all over. However, it's not the work of librarians alone. And the exciting part about media literacy is that it can fit into any set of standards, any content area. It can be embedded in social studies, in ELA, in physical education, in health and health sciences. It's all about working with students to help them begin to think and ask questions about what they are learning about, to listen to each other, to communicate with each other, and begin to say, where did this come from? Why would this author say that? What is their agenda, so to speak, in framing things this way? Why does this image look like this? Is this trying to convince me or sell me something? And that work is everywhere. It's not a heavy lift to have teachers, librarians, whomever begin to incorporate this into existing lessons and curriculum. There are so many resources out there, including our New York State computer science and digital fluency standards, so that with a little bit of help and finding the right resources and connecting them to educators in the state, then this is something that can be not an additional piece, but woven into what teachers are doing across the state.
And I think just to put to underline that a little bit, there was a time where, we still are focused on literacy, right? We worry about reading levels of kids. For a time, there was a lot of discussion about this idea that if everyone is a reading teacher, right? Whether you are or aren't, your discipline in some way involves reading. And I would say, to what Kate said, this is the same thing about media literacy.
Yep.
We're all in this together, and there's opportunities in every discipline at every grade level. The problem is, and Kate's nicer than I am, the problem is, this happens to us all the time. We get new standards. They aren't owned by any particular discipline. You get new ELA standards, and we know who's responsible for that. Get new math standards, we get that, right? But when we put in something that sort of goes across curricular areas and grade levels, people are like, I don't know, not biology. And then who does it fall on? The library media specialists. And if your district is fortunate enough to have those folks at every building, that's great, but they can't do it alone. And this really is an opportunity. We have these standards. They are supposed to be being implemented. To what extent have districts taken the time to unpack those computer science and digital fluency standards with their teachers across the district, not just library media specialists?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that. So our final question is for both of you. I'd love to hear both of your takes on it. So let's fast forward with me to 2030. If media literacy efforts really take root, what's the dream scenario for what our students can do? And what's it going to take to get there?
Well, I think if we think about it and what this could look like in the future, the framework is there literally within the new New York State Portrait of a Graduate. So we look at those aspects and those elements and identified as one of them. What do we want to see as New York State citizens, our high school graduates looking like, whether that be for college or career? And it's those attributes that are there. They are critical thinkers. They are global citizens. They're compassionate. They're empathetic. They're having skills and competencies in multiple literacies. The framework is there. And so I think that's why this conversation is also so important, because it aligns perfectly to what we've already identified as what we want to see our students looking like. So again, thinking about the alignment of existing resources, we have the Portrait of a Graduate. Now, identifying those attributes where, again, we're open-minded, we're teamwork, we're developing those collaboration skills, respecting each other, being aware of people's position, their backgrounds, their cultures, all of that relates to media literacy. So if we look to that, if we look to the Portrait of a Graduate as a framework, then media literacy is just another way to develop that in our students.
I agree completely. And from my perspective, in 2030, I will be sitting on a rocking chair on a porch looking at some Finger Lake. And while that's happening, maybe I will be reading some news about how many schools across the state have been implementing media literacy courses or media literacy experiences or endorsements related to Portrait of a Graduate. And the other thing I hope I get to see is big companies and even, bad actors somehow demonstrating frustration that they are unable to influence people in a way that they used to be because of our work in K-12.
I'd like to thank my guest, Dr. Michael J. Dowdy, Assistant Superintendent for the Northeastern Regional Information Center at Capital Region BOCES. Thank you, Mike, for being part of our conversation today.
Thanks so much, Ann. It was a pleasure.
And thank you, Katherine Hamill, Director for the Mid-Hudson Regional Information Center. Thank you, Kate, for joining me today.
Thank you, Ann, for having me.
I'd also like to thank my NYSSBA colleagues working behind the scenes, making it possible to bring this podcast to you. Thank you, Megan DeGennaro, Alyssa DeNoyer, and Al Marlin. My name is Ann Laszewski, Leadership Development Manager at the New York State School Boards Association, and this has been a production of NYSSBA's President's Gavel.
And this meeting is now adjourned.
Want to learn more about today's topic? Additional resources can be found in the show notes for this episode. Have a topic idea? Email us at gavel@nyssba.org. And if you find yourself tuning in each month, Search NYSSBA on Facebook or Twitter and show us your support by giving us a like. As always, thanks for listening.
If you want to learn more about today's topic, their additional resources can be found in the original show notes for this episode. And if you have questions, feedback, or suggestions for future episodes, including great education and non-education books that we can all learn from as school leaders, email me at dr.mike.dowdy@gmail.com. And I'd really appreciate it also if you could leave a rating and review the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, however you get it. It helps a lot. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with your colleagues. And if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, we'll take that too. Feel free to contact me at my email, dr.mike.dowdy@gmail.com.